Welcome one and all. You've tuned in to episode 251 of Healing Outside the Box. I'm Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. My mission right here is to look into conventional and perhaps not so conventional ways to get healthy and stay healthy, primarily focusing on healthy eating and stress reduction. I am always looking for help coming up with new episodes, so if there's anything that you want me to investigate in the nutrition area that's a bit sciencey, I will be happy to look into it for you and break it all down. And I just might give you my opinion as to why or why not you might be interested in putting in your time, effort, or money into X, Y, or Z. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been feeling a little funny lately. Not ha-ha funny, but a little off. What could it be that's making me feel a little off? Well, it just dawned on me that I must have been addicted to the crazy. And now that we have a sane president in the White House, it's just making me feel a little off. No more Carrot Top saying absolutely ridiculous things. No more toilet paper stuck to the bottom of his shoe as he's climbing the stairs to Air Force One. When I saw him on the TV set for about 5 or 6 seconds, part of me did I'm just feeling a little off. So I went to YouTube, put on a Sarah Cooper video and a Randy Rainbow video, and now I'm feeling so much better. Thank God for videos. Anyway, I've been asked by a few people what they should eat with their irritable bowel syndrome. And it's a complicated question. Well, not so much a complicated question, but more of a complicated answer. I've been reading some journal articles and listening to podcasts on this general subject. And I'm hearing a lot of terms just being thrown around, hither and thither, willy-nilly thrown around. Terms like SIBO, UC, and FODMAP. FODMAP, for goodness sake. So let's start off by defining a few terms. Inflammatory bowel disease, or IBD, is an umbrella term that includes Crohn disease and ulcerative colitis. IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, is quite different than inflammatory bowel disease. So let's talk about Crohn's and ulcerative colitis first. Crohn's disease is an inflammation that can occur anywhere along the GI tract, from the throat to the anus. And yes, Uranus. That was a little favorite pun in middle school that hopefully we can have a good laugh and move on. Crohn's usually affects the end of the small intestines, which is called the ileum. So basically, the small intestine is broken up into 3 parts: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. And it's the ileum that connects to the colon. The inflammation that occurs in Crohn's can filtrate through the entire intestinal wall. It's very painful. And with Crohn's, rectal bleeding is common. The breakdown in the wall can get so bad that some patients may have to have part of their colon removed. Also, B12 deficiency can occur. And to make matters worse, Crohn's disease is a chronic condition which can result in at least one remission even after the initial inflammation is cleared up. Crohn's can appear in patches. It can be accompanied by iron deficiency anemia and other serious side effects as well. The second disease under the IBD umbrella is ulcerative colitis. Now, UC usually starts at the distal end of the colon, or the rectum. Inflammation appears in a more continuous pattern, rather than patches here or there. This can also be serious and require hospitalizations to treat the flare-ups. Now, the functions of the colon include the reabsorption of water and electrolytes. So both of these functions can be impaired with ulcerative colitis. Stools can be watery, and even bloody diarrhea can happen. About 1/3 of patients will see a recurrence of symptoms over the years. Periods of stress can trigger a recurring episode. So stress by itself doesn't necessarily cause the disease, but it will make symptoms worse. I believe that's true of Crohn's as well. I'll put an article in the show notes that talks more about these two diseases. So both ulcerative colitis and Crohn's have more serious symptoms than irritable bowel syndrome. These symptoms in both can include blood in the stool, severe pain, fever, severe dehydration, weight loss, and anemia. If you have symptoms such as these, you should see your doctor immediately. The dietary treatment starts with fluids and electrolytes, and the goal is to get them somewhat in balance. Then vitamin and mineral supplements. Once food is tolerated, these people need high calories and moderate to high protein. Now, I'm going to put this next piece of news up front here because it's important for all GI conditions. Crohn's, UC, gastritis due to the H. pylori bacteria, and irritable bowel disease. And it's this. Alcohol, not surprisingly, can make matters worse. I'll put a study from the NIH about this in the show notes. Now, in the case of inactive IBD, or no symptoms, alcohol consumption will not significantly affect the lining of the colon. However, once symptoms occur, 3/4 of the people with IBD report a much worsening of symptoms with the alcohol. And with IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, about half of the drinkers report the worsening of symptoms when alcohol was ingested. And here's why. Alcohol can irritate the lining of your gut, including your esophagus and your stomach. It also has an effect on how your body reabsorbs fluids. And of course, that will make matters worse. Drinking alcohol can also cause certain foods to ferment in the gut in an unhealthy balance, which creates foul-smelling stool and possibly diarrhea. Alcohol in excess irritates the lining in a similar way to ulcerative colitis. So if you have ulcerative colitis and drink, the symptoms will be worse. Okay, let's go on to irritable bowel syndrome. IBS is different than inflammatory bowel disease. Although the symptoms can be similar, IBS is basically a cluster of symptoms with no clear cause. It is generally thought to be related to both stress and an imbalance of microorganisms in our gut. And by the way, we now call these gut microbes our microbiome or microbiota. So IBS doesn't necessarily start with the inflammation. It is theorized to start with the wrong bacteria in your intestines. And these bacteria create byproducts that will then cause the symptoms. And the symptoms are abdominal pain, not as severe as IBD, bloating, gas, either diarrhea or constipation, and I'll get into that in a minute. And the result can be stress-related symptoms like anxiety or depression. Conventional medicine doesn't have a solution to this normally, which is why some people go to functional medicine doctors. IBS is thought to be the diagnosis that doctors land on after they have ruled out other things such as ulcerative colitis, celiac disease, or gastritis due to H. pylori bacteria. The treatment for IBS centers around relieving the symptoms. So you might want to monitor your food intake, monitor the symptoms, and manage the stress if possible. And I realize this past year has not been the year to just snap out of it, but it might be the year to look into some relaxation activities or techniques. It is well known that dietary FODMAPs can trigger gut symptoms in people who already have IBS. IBS is a little like diverticulosis in this instance. A flare-up with fever, diarrhea, and inflammation is called diverticulitis. And with the itis at the end, it means that treatment involves bowel rest in clear fluids, then a slow progression to bland, easily digestible foods, and then back to a high-fiber diet when the symptoms go away. So the chronic condition of diverticulosis calls for high fiber and high fluids. Also no seeds that could get caught in the pockets of the lining of the colon. In my opinion, it's a similar situation with irritable bowel syndrome. When symptoms flare up in IBS, you might want a low FODMAP diet to rest the bowels and then switch to a high FODMAP diet when the symptoms go away. Okay, so what is a FODMAP? Here we go. FODMAPs are fermentable, oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. At first I couldn't figure out what the A stood for, but they needed a vowel, so they put in the and. Alright, so these are basically short-chain carbohydrates that are not well absorbed into the small intestines. So they're prone to absorb water and ferment in the colon by bacteria. Now this might be getting into the TMI category, but oligosaccharides are things like onions, beans, garlic, Brussels sprouts. Disaccharides are your sucrose or table sugar and lactose or milk sugar. Monosaccharides include glucose and fructose or fruit sugar. Polyols are things like sorbitol, which is in sugar-free chewing gum. So you can see where I'm going with this. It's a bit of a common sense approach. If you have symptoms such as gas, bloating, pain, and diarrhea, you don't want to be necessarily eating a lot of Brussels sprouts. So these high FODMAP foods can be both soluble and insoluble fibers. FODMAP foods are partially digestible food, but they may also be lactose or glucose, which can be digested, but are also yummy to our gut bacteria. So dietary fiber is basically carbohydrates that are not completely digested, and it's considered in the nutrient category. The recommended daily allowance is 25 grams for women and 38 grams for men. So what does soluble fiber do? Well, I touched on this before, but it draws water into the gut and may lower your cholesterol and blood sugar levels. Good sources are black beans, 15 grams for 1 cup, other beans, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, and those types of vegetables, sweet potatoes, and fruits with edible skins. Also, figs and dates, sunflower seeds, and whole oats. Now, when you think of insoluble fibers, this would be the bran layer of the wheat. Also carrots, celery, cucumber seeds and skins, and beans of all kinds. So high fiber foods contain a few substances that are resistant to the breakdown of the food by our internal enzymes. So our body doesn't break them down very well, but they are a necessary part of our digestive process to keep our food moving, to prevent constipation, and to feed our healthy gut microorganisms. Now, as these FODMAP foods do their job mostly in the small and large intestines, it usually takes at least 4 hours after eating a food for these high FODMAP foods to create symptoms. Despite this, many people with IBS report that their gut symptoms seem to appear or worsen immediately or soon after eating a meal. So while these symptoms may not be due to the food that they've just eaten, there may be other gut abnormalities found in people with IBS that may help to explain this. But it's still not completely clear, so the jury's out on that. The theory basically is that it may be related to your gut microbiome being out of balance, and this is referred to as dysbiosis. Now, there's different types of IBS, so let's break it down. By the way, there's now a test for it, and there's a theory out now that the symptoms may come in part from an overactive immune system, which seems to be everywhere. All right, the different types are IBS-C, which means IBS with constipation, and IBS-D, IBS with diarrhea. Now, they do a breath test for this. They test the gas that you breathe out after they feed you a sugar solution. If your breath test is high in methane, that means that methane-producing microorganisms are growing out in your gut. And if you have that, you'll be diagnosed with IBS-C for constipation. If the breath test is positive for hydrogen, that means that hydrogen-producing microorganisms are causing diarrhea. So you have IBS-D. A few of the food poisoning bacteria will put you in this category. Bacteria like E. coli or Klebsiella. There's also IBS-F, which means alternating diarrhea and constipation. Theoretically, you have a mixed bag of bacteria growing out. They now throw out another term. They say 60 to 70% of irritable bowel syndrome is SIBO. Now, what the heck is SIBO? Well, SIBO stands for small intestine bacterial overgrowth. And it's not any bacteria that are growing in your intestines, because we all have bacteria growing. It's problematic bacteria that are more than likely growing out. And it's often a result from a problem elsewhere. For example, delayed motility or slow-moving food through your GI tract. Now, most of IBS is bacterial, as we have said, but it also could be candida, which is a yeast. Unfortunately, we have yeast in all of us. And a diet that's high in simple sugars can result in more yeast that overgrows the beneficial bacteria. And that can create a problem, because yeast will produce CO2. Now, what triggers an episode of IBS symptoms? The details of this are still unclear, but there's been some speculation that it can start with foodborne illness or food poisoning. And experts are putting this in the SIBO basket, meaning that we've ingested bacteria from that leftover chicken that we forgot to put back in the refrigerator. Other functional medicine people, and I tend to agree with them, say that people with SIBO may also have a leaky gut. I have a few episodes on leaky gut, and I'll put a general episode that defines it in the show notes. Basically, it means that there's damage to the lining of your intestines and substances that shouldn't be getting into the bloodstream are getting through. So maybe you have a leaky gut or irritable insides. What do you do? Well, the first thing I would recommend is to go to an expert in gut health. You can talk to that expert about medications that might help, or you could do a period of bowel rest. Your healthcare expert will be able to guide you through the process. But let's talk about a few things that may make it worse. If you have type 2 diabetes, it may help to get your diabetes under control. Uncontrolled diabetes can create something called gastroparesis, and that's a fancy way of saying slow stomach emptying. The slower the food moves through your stomach and small intestines, the more the bacteria can chew down on it and create all kinds of gases. So that would certainly help. There's now more aggressive treatments like the Freestyle Libre, where you can monitor your blood sugar all day long without sticking your finger. I've got an episode on that as well, and I'll put it in the show notes. The second thing is that stress is not necessarily the cause, but it will make it worse. And I think that's true, in my opinion, for all of these things. Antibiotics may also make matters worse, because they will kill all bacteria, including your beneficial gut microbiome that helps fight off the bad guys. And, as we've discussed, alcohol will make it worse. Now, what about the diet? Okay, I'm going to give you my opinion here. Others may vary. You can alter your diet to improve the symptoms, but it won't necessarily cure IBS. If you really want to go for prevention, I would suggest going to an expert in laying down a plan. But if your symptoms are mild and want to try things at home, the first thing I would recommend is to go organic, especially when it comes to fruits and vegetables. Now, in terms of a long-term, low FODMAP diet, I don't know if that's necessary. My personal opinion is that it is too strict. It's also insufficient in a lot of key minerals. And of course, a very low-fiber diet may clog up the works, creating a longer than optimal time to move the food through your GI tract. It may work short-term for bowel rest, but again, it would have to depend on what type of IBS that you have. I would prefer a lower fermentation diet, which is less restrictive. I call it roots and fruits. Also, ginger has been found to help GI motility. People have tried peppermint. That can certainly help. They may get a peppermint tea. Certainly can't hurt. Other people have tried oregano for the IBS with diarrhea. Seems to help some people. There's one substance which is a chemical additive that I might add to this list. Polysorbate 80 seems to interfere with healthy gut bacteria. And foods that have a lot of polysorbate 80 are going to be mostly processed foods. You may also want to try anti-inflammatory foods. I mentioned ginger. Also resveratrol, which is in red grapes, raspberries, blueberries, and similar foods. Also fish that's rich in omega-3 fatty acids, and turmeric. Now, the rest of my recommendations really center around stress and exercise. If you can find any stress reduction technique that you enjoy and will be willing to do on a regular basis, that can only help. As I've mentioned before with the diabetes, controlling your blood sugar will certainly help. Avoiding large jumps in your weight, and moderate exercise. And we all know it's been a difficult year, and we're all very anxious to get out and enjoy the outside with our friends. And we will get there. But the way I see it is that taking care of yourself, or self-care as we like to call it, has never been more important than it is now. So please stay safe, enjoy being with the loved ones that you can be with, and be kind to yourself. That's all I have for you today. Be well, and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.